The topic we look forward to studying and analyzing for this project is overconsumption and debt. While those are two different concepts, they remain interlinked, and as part of this case study, we will be looking at how one leads to the other, as well as their economic impact. More precisely, we will investigate household indebtedness rather than governmental debt.
Before going into details, to help further understand this economic issue, let's go over some basic descriptions. So when we talk about debt, it means that someone owes money to a creditor, which is a person or an institution that lent the money or to whom you owe bills. So it can be a bank or even the government. Indeed, debt can be classified into two categories, either good or bad, or secured and non-secured. Firstly, just like a student loan leads to a future career, a good debt has the potential of increasing personal net worth. A bad debt is money used to finance depreciating assets, such as a credit card or a vehicle. Secondly, a secured debt means that if you fail to pay the loan or the item, as a form of compensation, the creditor is allowed to seize the asset. On the other hand, an unsecured debt is when the creditor does not have the right to seize. And lastly, when we mean overconsumption, in simple terms, it means that it occurs when the amount of wants exceeds the amount of needs. It can be influenced by numerous factors such as the cost of living or even social pressure. Now let's look at this case through a timeline. So the main cause of this economic issue was COVID-19. So during the pandemic, there was a huge repercussions on our country's economy, and more precisely on people's consuming habits. That is what is classified as crisis era habits. And despite rising prices and inflation that were caused by increased demand, meeting constrained supply, the population continued overconsuming. Consequently, the debt-to-income ratio in Canada has been increasing since the summer of 2024 up to now. In fact, the household credit market debt has reached 174.9% in the second quarter of this year. Overall, household savings and investments keep slowing down as household spendings spike. Indeed, during the first quarter of 2025, the spending rate inclined by 1%, while the saving rate declined down to 5.7%. And lastly, household credit market debt added up to $3.1 billion in the first quarter of 2025. Consequently, Canadians consume at a rate 10 times higher than that of poorer countries. The source CBC News puts well into words this issue to help visualize and imagine how badly this household debt situation has been recently. Essentially, they state that Canadians would owe $1.75 for every dollar worth of disposable income. Canadian overconsumption is mainly caused by the desire to fit in and to reach a certain social status.
Although it is important to understand that not all debt are bad, debt, however, come with significant risk. The main possible economic impact could be the following. The first one being slower long-term economic growth due to reduced saving. When people overconsume and use credit, they build up debt. At first, this extra spending makes the economy roll because business sell more and generate profit. Nevertheless, after a while, people must use their income to pay their debt and interest instead of buying new things. When people stop spending, business sell less, which slows the production and job growth. This means that Canada's economy rolls less because consumer spending is one of its main drivers. The scenario would be Canadian households save a good portion of their income that are deposited in banks or invested in financial markets, which allow capital to flow into the investment. This makes the economy roll by supporting long-term economic growth and job creation. An after scenario would be Canadian overconsume and their income goes to wants rather than saving, which means that to fund these spendings, households rely on credit cards, personal loans, or other high-interest debt. This leads to less money available, banks lending less because they worry about people not paying back, and mostly slowing the economy's growth rate over time. The second point would be increased financial vulnerability and risk of economic instability. When people have high debt, even small change in the economy, like higher interest rate, inflation, or unemployment, can cause huge problems. People might not be able to pay their bills or loans on time. If a lot of people can pay their debts, banks and lenders lose money, which makes people spend less. This can cause the economy to fall into a recession. A before scenario would be households maintain controlled debt level and moderately low default. consumer spending is stable, which supports retail, service, and housing markets without huge risk. An after scenario would be household debt makes people financially vulnerable to economic shocks like rising interest rates, unemployment, or inflation. This reduces domestic consumption since a large portion of households' income is spent on debt payment instead of goods and service. Moreover, financial institutions face greater risk of non-performing loans, which could affect lending rates and access to credit. Finally, an in-depth population reduces overall economic resilience during recession.
Making links. So let's look at what we've seen in class and connect it to this case study. In relation to the first impact that was focused towards effects on economic growth, so slow economy, lower investments, and slower pace of job creation, we would be able to link this to one main economic indicator from part 1 of this course, which would be the GDP. In fact, in the long term, it can lead to an increase of unemployment, fewer savings, which means lower future spendings and investments in businesses, and much more that slows down the growth of the GDP. Indeed, we talked about vulnerability to certain economic challenges, such as inflation spikes or higher interest rates that could be affected by external shocks. This would link to two concepts learned in class. The first would be demand, because if people are spending more, demand rises, and the pressure on prices would also be upward. Similarly, in the long run, it could potentially lead to one of the main economic indicator, more precisely inflation. Overall, most of the impacts related to our subject have a link to a broader topic discussed in class, which would be financial confidence. In this case, lower confidence that is spurred because of periods of overconsumption and bad financial choices.
What surprised us the most is how overconsumption and household debt are connected and how much these two issues can influence not only individual but also the overall Canadian economy. At first, we mainly saw debt as something personal, like using a credit card. But our research has shown that when many households face similar financial difficulties, it can have a significant impact on the Canadian economy. Another thing that surprised us a lot is how overconsumption can create a short-term illusion of economic growth. Indeed, when people spend more, business earn higher profits and the economy seems stronger. However, in the long term, when people start paying their debts instead of consuming, the economy slows down. The before and after effect really helped us gain better understanding and make connection between individuals' choice and economic indicator like the GDP growth. What we are most interested in exploring next is how social factors like trends shape people's spending choice and attitude towards debt. We want to understand how this pressure contributes to overconsumption. As young adults growing up in a society where overconsumption is encouraged by social media, this topic could be interesting for a future and financial decision. Thank you very much, and we hope this opened your horizon on an economic issue affecting our everyday lives.